is the great city of New York after Sandy pounded, flooded, crashed, and burned its way through, leaving hardened New Yorkers dazed and humbled.
They didn't believe the hype when Hurricane Irene was here. Sandy kicked our ass. Sandy kicked our ass. Excuse my language, but it's horrible.
We expected an unprecedented storm impact here in New York City, and that's what we got.
Ahead of the storm, Manhattan tried to duck and hide from the oncoming fury. The nation's largest school system closed, its financial capital shut down, and New York's vast commuter system, nearly 15 million riders a day, stopped in its tracks. It's morning rush hour, and normally thousands of commuters would be flooding Grand Central Terminal. Instead, flooding from Sandy has now brought trains to a halt. This terminal is now virtually deserted. No one is coming in and no one is going out. As Sandy stormed ashore yesterday, things in Manhattan started coming down. In a busy section of Midtown, gusts blew over this crane on a 90-story skyscraper. It dangled there dangerously over a normally crowded street. The winds later ripped the facade right off this downtown apartment building, making it look like a dollhouse. Then, as the storm made landfall, the city's worst fears were realized. A surge of seawater flooded parts of the island, and an explosion at a power station lit up the east side of Manhattan. That helped plunge the lower half of the island into complete darkness.
The contractions began yesterday morning.
Julia Alemany is thrilled to have her newborn son in her arms today. But at the moment the lights went out last night, she was in labor. The backup generator at New York University's Langone Medical Center failed.
It was more crazy than we could have possibly imagined.
Her husband, Jerome Marcus, swung into action, helping doctors as they gave his wife an epidural in the darkened hospital.
I was holding a cell phone above her while they were putting in the IV and while they were putting in the epidural.
Then the hospital evacuated Julia and other patients, putting them onto special stretchers.
They proceeded to slide her really slowly down 8 flights of stairs. Everybody was standing on the side. People were restricted from entering the stairwells. There was a lot of screaming going on.
They eventually put Julia in an ambulance, which sped off to another hospital, Mount Sinai, where Micah was born within minutes of arrival. Jerome says all the nurses and doctors are heroes.
Here in Carmel, I don't know how they were able to handle that situation. I mean, you know, on 9/11 they were telling us they had something similar, but nothing like this. It was unprecedented.
Also unprecedented, parts of the city were still underwater this morning. This underpass in lower Manhattan is completely submerged, and there is a heavy smell of oil here. And just to give you an idea of how flooded this area is, take a look at this. That is the top of a truck. And the most crippling blow to a city that relies more than any other on public transportation, the subways were overwhelmed. Even New York City cops, who've seen it all, couldn't believe that efforts to keep water out of the system failed.
It actually was higher. At one point, if you look at this, all this was floating. And all these sandbags were here. So when the water broke out, it pushed all the sandbags into the street.
Meanwhile, the city's major airports were swamped. No flights in or out. On the streets, a different kind of traffic snarl. Taxi cabs underwater and cars tossed like toy boats.
Just want to make me cry. After last night, seeing, you know, all the cars floating back and forth, this blowing up, the transformers blowing up last night. I didn't think this would happen.
Just how long will it take for New York City to get back to normal? The mayor told his town it would need something that is often in short supply here: patience. And patience indeed. Wall Street will reopen tomorrow. Schools remain closed. Transit and power could take days to recover. But as for those babies, Brian, life goes on. I just got off the phone with a nurse at Mount Sinai where we visited today. She told me that 42 babies were born there during Sandy.
Andrea Canning on what is still a sporty night in lower Manhattan. Andrea, thanks for your reporting all day. There came a moment here in New York City last night, kind of a tipping point, where city officials and staffers of the governor now admit it felt like control had switched from this big, burly, powerful city right over to Mother Nature. And earlier today, when we ventured 5 stories underground beneath where al-Qaeda terrorists knocked down the Twin Towers a decade ago, it still felt a little unhinged beneath the streets of New York City. Last night, at a moment of nature's choosing, parts of New York became New Orleans and went below sea level, and in what seemed like seconds, 13 feet of water poured into the city and into a sensitive spot, the bowels of Ground Zero. This is the commuter train service back and forth between New Jersey and New York called The Path. Service was last interrupted after 9/11. In fact, this station is still being built in the pit that once housed the World Trade Center. And now the trackbed is full of water from the Hudson River. It's where we met today with New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo.